Good morning, slingers.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is March 7th,
It's
and
been
the
a week.
world is a changin'.
Hour by hour and day by day.
Yes.
Yeah, you just can't keep up.
Uh,
Yeah, it seems
This
like
was literally yesterday. I
yep.
leave my desk. Okay, the tariffs are on, okay? And everybody's being cautious. I had mills that wouldn't even quote me yesterday because they were waiting. Okay, I go to lunch with my husband. My husband came to lunch and he's like, "Did you hear the tariffs are off again?" And I'm like, "What? No." You can't even keep up anymore.
you can't even
Yeah.
keep up. And it's so much speculation. It's just like you're constantly like, do I believe this? Is this true?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I had somebody tell me like, you know, the tariffs went into place on the 4th, and by the 6th they were off.
hmm
And they were like, don't ship anything those 2 days because they're probably going to negotiate and be off by the 6th. And I was like, yeah, right. And then
hmm
just kidding.
But anybody
Yep.
that shipped on those 2 days they're probably
They are subject to
subject to
tariffs, as
duties.
far as we have been told. Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't realize
Hmm.
that. So if it's in that window, they still would be then?
Hmm.
No way. Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh.
I know. And there was a point that they hadn't been recorded in the Federal Registrar yet. And
Uh-huh.
so I thought that maybe meant that you wouldn't be subject to tariffs until they were actually recorded on the 6th. But turns out, blah, 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 legal this, legal that, they were. So
So how does that
Well,
work? Does it have to be like what would quantify like I mean if you take an order that doesn't necessarily mean does it have to be actually like picked
physically
up or
shipped.
like physically picked up like say you had an order on the 4th and it was being picked up on the 7th would that be subject still or not?
No, mm-mm. It has to physically cross the border on those days.
that's a
Oh,
good question, Trent. Yeah,
Yeah.
whoever the importer of record when it crosses the customs broker. Customs,
so
not
just
broker,
those two
but
days so
customs.
it's like oh my gosh that's
Yeah, it's pretty
crazy.
crazy. Yeah, something else I found out yesterday I thought was pretty interesting is that there is a period of time where if you had something on the water, like let's just say, for example, from China,
Okay.
well, from China, if you had it on the water between a certain date, you are not subject to the increased tariffs. Because it was like even though it hadn't actually physically crossed the US border, it was like in process. So I thought that was pretty interesting
Does
for
that
the
come do you
China
think because
tariffs.
you think that's because like it's technically in like international waters now it kind of count as that kind of middle ground or
Maybe.
something or
Who knows?
huh.
Yeah. I just told Chelsea yesterday I started following Howard Lutnick, our Secretary of Commerce, on Instagram. Thought maybe I'd
Yeah.
get some like inside scoop, but he doesn't post very often.
It's kind of
Turns
busy.
turns out he has like 9,000 followers. So
I told Natalie it's the time to slide into his DMs, man. Before he blows up.
Yep. You know the breaking news that way then.
yeah, fun
Yeah.
fun fact about Howie, he just celebrated his 30-year wedding anniversary in December with his wife.
Yeah,
Oh.
that was his
Well,
last post. Well, Nat, should we touch on we talked tariffs, which we can continue to talk about, but also during all of this, we also had the duty increase that we have not talked about yet.
We did, which is craziness. It's almost like it got overshadowed. Like I haven't really seen a ton of info on it at all.
Right.
So that is really confusing. I don't know. Did you know, Trent? Did you know about this?
I didn't even I mean as you know I was gone on vacation so getting back I honestly didn't even know about that. I've seen some of the other news but not I was wondering if there was any movement on that and I'm very surprised.
Yes.
It shows you to your point of how undershadowed it's been or overshadowed rather I
Yeah.
should say.
Yeah. So the prelim rate was announced for the ADD portion. So
Okay.
it's really important to remember there's the ADD portion, anti-dumping duty, and there's the CVD portion, which is the countervailing duty.
hmm
For the first time in history of this specific softwood lumber dispute, they have announced the ADD rate, but they have not announced a prelim CVD rate. And what that means is that even though it's prelim, so it's not in place, it's not, I mean, if you're woods crossing, it doesn't mean it's happening right now necessarily, even though it does get backdated. It's confusing. But there's a time period. So like once the prelim gets announced and there's like a certain amount of days until the final rate gets announced. But since the ADD was released without the CVD, when the ADD prelim rate goes into place, it will be different than the CVD rate. So essentially what I'm saying is like we'll have one rate from administrative review 6 and we'll have one rate from administrative review 5 at the same time. It just makes everything that was extremely complicated one more level of complicated. It's crazy.
They're
So anyway,
stacked then?
there's what?
The rates are combined then, I assume, correct?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
overall,
they're
so
combined to make like
yeah.
one duty rate, but yes,
Okay.
they're two separate rates within that. So the rate was like 14.4, I want to
Okay.
say. And in total, both rates together. And now with this preliminary rate, which I would just want to preface, does not mean it's the final rate. It's generally within like 1 to 2 points of the final rate, but we don't know the final rate. But let's just pretend that it is the final rate.
Okay.
So with the new rate, if it becomes the final rate, then the total duty amount would be 26.81%.
So
So
isn't
it
that
went up
higher than they thought?
significantly.
Were they thinking
Well,
25?
they were saying it was going to go up between 25 and 30 to 25 and 30% between those two. But
Okay.
that's just the ADD. So we don't even know what the CVD is. So I'm thinking it's going to be higher than that. I mean,
What was the
we'll
previous
see.
DVD? Do you, I mean, or like, or do you
The
remember, or like,
current the
yeah.
current CVD is 6.74%.
So if it was on top of that, you'd still be looking at like 32 then roughly now is what you're saying.
Well, once they increase CVD, it will
Oh, but they're going to
be
increase it then too. So it would be,
most likely, most
I mean,
likely.
assuming they do, then it would be over 30% combined.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And we're looking at over 50% total
Oh,
with the tariff.
With the
So,
tariffs.
oh my
For
God.
those 3 days, fourth,
yeah.
fifth, and sixth, you were at 50, could have been at 50% potentially.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear everybody's how they did business differently. It was either a really busy week for some traders or it was a really slow week for some, depending on how, um, you know, careful you are or conservative if you're a risk
Mhm.
taker. Some people saw this as a really opportunistic time, and some saw it as, everything needs to, the world needs to stop until this gets figured out. So,
Yeah, I think that it's important to point out like attitude. Attitude is
Mhm.
everything. And it's
mhm,
like, are you going to be optimistic about this or are you just going to panic and pause? And I definitely had some like stressful moments, but you have to just remember like it's out of our control.
mhm.
Like it's one day at a
Yep.
time, it's out of our control. We're just along for the ride. And what kind of face are you going to show to your customers and your vendors?
Yeah.
Right. And if we all hit the panic button, I mean, energy transfers big time. So you're responsible for that. If you're hitting the panic
Mhm.
button and you're sending panic throughout your own company, throughout your own, your peer group in the industry, your suppliers,
Yep.
your vendors, like you're part of the problem. So,
Right.
so
Nope. It's true.
doom and
It
gloom
comes
does
from the
not
top.
help. It does. It does.
Now, if I
So
remember
here we are, we're
correctly,
cheerleaders.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, everything's great. Like that one meme. It's like the dog. He's sitting there. Everything's on fire on him.
Oh
He's
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I've
everything
only
is
s-
fine.
I've only sent that meme like 6 times this week.
Oh yeah. Now, with that same and that same topic we're speaking of, if I remember previously, don't certain companies have their own specific rates? Am I right on that one?
Yes.
Was that
Yeah.
covered in this at all or not? Or was this just a very preliminary, so that wasn't even brought up?
No, they announced I think it's West Fraser and Canfor have their own rates.
Are they
And
lower than us?
they did announce them. I don't know what they were though. I don't really pay attention to those ones because they don't really
Okay.
affect, you know.
No, that's fair. Do you remember if by any chance if they were lower? Because I feel like historically they were lower, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong on that. But I
Oh,
think
you
that
know what? I remember now. It is a weighted average of the two rates. And so
okay.
one rate was significantly higher and one rate was lower. And so the all other rate is what most companies pay
Yep.
was right in the middle of the two.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's how it went. Yeah.
Yes. And oh, I can tell you I found it. uh Canfor's prelim anti-dumping rate came back at 34.61%. And West Fraser came back at 9.48%.
Wait, how?
Well, there's rumors around town.
I mean, that's
that
a
there,
massive difference, though. I mean, I'm not crazy on this, right? I mean, that's a large difference.
yes.
Okay.
Um, Apparently this is not substantiated, is that there was a Home Depot contract and there was some price dumping apparently related to the contract that was found.
Oh, okay.
But I think what I had heard was like that was also during COVID, and so prices were changing quickly and significantly, and they were already locked into a contract. That's what I heard, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay.
So I cannot
Well,
be held accountable for anything I say on this
Don't shoot the
podcast.
messenger.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Wow, that's crazy. Like, this, it's just so, like you said before, it's just really hard to keep track because there's so many nuances, and then you're looking at the different windows, and you're looking at still uncertainty when there's like, it's just so many, it's just so many things to try to keep track of, and then at the same time, like we spoke about, you're trying to make a decision that's best for your company or pause something while also trying to make sure things look good. It's just like it's not easy to deal with all those plates at one time. You know, it's like it's very difficult. And I mean, kudos to people, you know, such as yourself, who are able to kind of manage this, because I think people can take it for granted how difficult it can be to be able to manage all this, and also keep, like you said, keep a happy face and make a right decision when it's the uncertainty is just so high. It has to be kind of, for lack of a better say, maybe it's proper, like scary almost, to kind of make a decision, because you're kind of putting yourself and your company out there. So I mean, it's not stuff that decisions you're taking lightly, because like you said, if you shipped in those couple of days, I mean that could have a really bad effect. And it's like, not long term, but I mean relative, if you're sitting there going, all I do is wait until Friday. So I mean, it's so
right.
tough to navigate all this. I mean, it takes it's a learning experience, obviously, as you're
Right, and
going
it's
through it,
so
learning how to do.
complicated too, as far as like the legal jargon and the announcements and how they say things. It's really interesting. It's like
Mm.
you have to, I don't know, have a good trade attorney.
Oh,
I think that
seriously.
it's a good learning experience, as was, something like COVID when the market went crazy, when it went silent and then it went crazy. Very similar
Hmm.
kind of feeling this week. And so I think that anybody who's joined the industry post 2020, this is a really good learning experience to see, like, we're not safe from this. This always happens. We're in businesses have cycles and policies and politics and recession. So
Yep.
I think, for what it's worth, take the lessons out of it that you learn, whether it's to take risks, to not take risks. You kind of learn your style over time in these times. Tough times kind of show.
Yeah. No, it's so true.
Unprecedented times, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, then
exactly.
you go from that, and then you add on the other layer, which once again I don't think is equally had a whole lot of coverage, which is the White House on, I believe it was Saturday the first, Saturday the first, they put out a release, like just a governmental press release. It was addressing the threat to national security from imports of timber and lumber. And so it basically, like, brought out some steps of what they were going to do, and like there's some like key things that were interesting in this, which is like the United States has ample timber resources. The current United States softwood lumber industry has the practical production capacity to supply 95% of the United States 2024 softwood consumption. Yet since 2016, the United States has been a net importer of lumber. That's a quote directly from the release. And so the idea is that it says the policy of the United States is to ensure reliable, secure, and resilient domestic supply chains of timber, lumber, and their derivative products. And so they're having an investigation where the Secretary of Commerce shall initiate an investigation under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act to determine the effects of national security on imports of timber, lumber, and their derivative products. And it goes through like all these different steps they're going to take, which is very, I don't know, you could correct me, if you don't think this is 100% accurate of you, but it's very kind of SLA-esque in that the ideas of what they're trying to do, but it seems to apply to everywhere, like not just Canada, from how I'm reading this. Like they don't single out any single country that I see on here. So it's another added amount of uncertainty on top of all the other uncertainty, to be like, does that get rolled into what we're doing? Will that be, kind of extrapolated out of, the other one? I mean, it just seems like it's something where if action is taken, that it might just be put on top of certain things, or maybe it'll be. I mean, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. It's all kind of speculation, but it's another thing where you're like, I mean, it says no later than 270 days after the date is reported, the Secretary of Commerce shall submit a report to the president. So I mean, that's a long period of time. Luckily, it's not like a 90-day one, which would be, I think, a little bit more, I guess you could say, scary, but still, it's another thing to be like, well, what does this mean in 270 days from now? Something, nothing? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think one of the main conversations, I've been having is, right, do we have ample resources in the United States, but let's think about let's actually think about when COVID happened and we had a large demand and undersupply. All these mills ramped up production, and maybe some mills even got built, it expanded all the, and then what happens? Then more regulations come into place since then, and then what did we lose last year? 12 mills. And so you're not just going to open up a mill overnight, and you're not just going to be able to go out, harvest this lumber, process it, and have it readily and available to sell in the marketplace, for the demand that we currently have. So there's a fine balance that has to happen, and I also think we're just overregulated in that way. And so unfortunately, I think what's happening is they're completely breaking everything and then fixing it, and we
I'm
just
gonna
have to be
rebuild it.
patient. We have to be patient and we have to wait, and that's going to be the hard part. That's going to be where people will go out of business, mills will shut down. I think that a lot of things will change in terms of how business is done, but
I
we
think
don't really have a
that,
choice. That or we pay these price hikes with the tariffs and the duty, and
yeah.
I
I
mean,
think that part of this announcement, in my opinion, although they say it's national security, if you read it, one thing that it does say is that the president would like recommendations from our boy Howie on in one of the things is incentives to increase domestic production.
Yep.
So, although it kind of looks like it's about imports, I think, in my opinion, just from the little I know about how intensely regulated our industry is for harvesting, I think that this might be a legal way to get around some of these barriers that we have when we're trying to harvest timber. I mean, I was reading this article from the AFRC, American Forest Resource Council, yesterday, and they in there quoted like the average time to get a permit to be able to harvest because of all the red tape is like over like 2 years. Like you
Hmm.
can't go out and be like, I want to do a study to make sure that this area is okay to like properly harvest. I'm going to replant all my trees. I'm going to do all the right things. I'm going to have all the right setbacks. I'm going to do everything correctly, but it still takes 2+ years. I mean, that's insanity.
Nope. Well, it's kind of funny you mention that because if you look at the next point right after you mention it, literally hammers home what you said in that where it goes policy recommendations. This is what they're asking for: policy recommendations for strengthening the United States timber and lumber supply chain through strategic investments and permitting reforms. So I mean, literally, that's exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's laying out verbatim what you're saying. I'm just trying to find quicker, more efficient ways to do, all of this across the board, which I think
Hmm.
is a net positive across the board. If it's as long as it's all implemented properly by, people who are, I guess you could say maybe stakeholders that understand what's going on. I mean, I think that's the key thing is you got to make sure that you have people that understand the industry so they can really be impactful, not just, people who are at arm's length even, because then that's where it gets a little bit, like, I don't know, that's where it gets a little hazy. I mean, I always think by the thing that some of the best managers and best CEOs are the people who like when they want to know what needs to be changed, they talk to the people on the line because those are the people who see the
Exactly.
efficiencies and lack of efficiency.
Exactly.
So I think if you use that kind of mentality here, then it could be awesome, because you're hearing from the people who understand this, and then they can actually give you real life input that matters.
Yes. We the people.
Yep, exactly, exactly. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this pans out, but I mean, it's it'll be I have a feeling it'll be a weekly conversation or in some extent across the board for all this stuff, and but as that happens, the world keeps moving on, more news keeps happening, and it's interesting because I mean, when you look at that, a lot of things change, but things still stay the same at the same time. I mean, when you look at the other news across the board, I mean, we're still seeing mergers and acquisitions, we're still seeing things like that happen. Like one of the biggest articles we had in the last week was Wilson Lumber acquiring Nashville Lumber. So, you're still seeing things like that happen. USLBM announced an acquisition as well. So I mean, you're still seeing some of these companies that are making acquisitions and new ones making acquisitions. So I mean, that at least makes me feel good that throughout all of this, people are still kind of, I don't want to say keeping the status quo, so to speak, but I mean kind of that in the aspect where it's not like you're seeing a huge panic where people are like, well, we're not going to invest in anyone or we're going to invest here at all. Like they're still seeing that this is an industry they want to invest in and that they're trying to grow still. So I feel like that gives me some level of peace. And
Hmm.
I mean, when you're looking at pricing, I mean, the last alert that we had published from the end of the February, which was the 28th, showed that the prices were up 6% to 541 from the previous week, which was 511. So I mean, it's a $30 increase, which is pretty decent compared to a lot of the other stuff we've seen recently. Which you look at that in tandem with the mortgage rates, especially the 30-year, finally falling down to 6.63%. I mean, it's making that downturn we've kind of spoken about over the weeks and months about hoping it happens. I mean, it gives me optimism that at least we're not seeing full blown, which I don't think we would, but like COVID level panic where people are like, chicken little, the sky's falling. I mean, and I think one of the most interesting things about mortgage applications, which just blew my mind seeing this, is that the NBA said that mortgage applications increased 20.4% from one
Whoa.
week earlier.
That's
Wow.
insane. That's the most we've heard of in years, I feel like.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's pretty cool though, because I feel like in the fact it's like the one thing that we always talk about. You have to have some of these low rates because it starts to scare people away. So, I mean, I think that it's the perfect circle in the context of you're seeing, kind of those things, prices going up a little bit, which obviously there's delay and things of that nature with, how that hits the consumer. But, and then, the mortgage rates and applications. So, I mean, I feel like going into the summer now or the spring, summertime, it's at least we're seeing a good trend. Obviously that could change week to week as we spoke about earlier, but I feel good right now that it's not, in a season that for, which could be kind of bad at the end of the, the end of the winter time, you're seeing positive things across the board outside of the first things you're talking about. Anything non-tariff related is positive, it seems like.
That's right. Just gotta stay optimistic.
Yep.
And that's our news,
That's our
guys.
news today. Awesome. Well, Trent, welcome back. Good to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be back. Super excited.
Yeah, and we'll see you guys next week.
All righty.
Signing off, slingers.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.